Welcome, folks. My name is Abigail Tucker. I am one of the co-founders of Heroes Active Bystandership. I am thrilled to be with you today. We're going to do some general housekeeping, and then we're going to actually jump right in with some very thought-provoking questions. And then we will move to a little introduction of our presenters, our panelists today. This is truly a panel presentation. We'll dive into the content here in a moment, but for those of you who are joining us live, at the bottom of your scroll bar, we have both a chat feature and a place that you can hit Q&As. We would love to hear from you. Our panelists have feedback and experience to share, but they would love to answer any specific questions that you may have. So please don't hesitate to chime in and share that. Today's session is being recorded, and so for those of you who are listening on demand, if you have questions after you listen to this on demand, we would also still like to hear from you. You can contact us via our website on a contact form. We would love to filter your questions to our panelists and get back to you. So just because you're listening on demand doesn't mean you missed that opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. And if you are brand new to Heroes, welcome. We are excited to have you, and we are excited to share with you what we believe is truly one of the most helpful solutions and underutilized solutions in public safety and criminal justice for the outcomes of both elevating the workforce and the people we serve. I am going to do some panelist introductions. However, I'm going to change it up and start with a thought-provoking question to my panelists. And some of them may answer. We've got a lot of good questions here today, but the title of our session today is From Patrol to Detention. And we're really trying to target those sheriff's organizations who pretty much by all state standards have to have a jail, have to have a detention of some sort, many of which also have patrol, maybe dispatch, maybe animal control. I've seen agencies, sheriff's organizations even have fire and EMS. So it's really so many ways that sheriff's officers serve their community. But we observe that active bystandership culture has really been initiated in the law enforcement and patrol community. And one of our passions in Heroes, in partnership with our law enforcement agencies, is to build that culture on the detention side as much as throughout the entire sheriff's organization. So we're really trying to speak directly to sheriffs and people working in sheriff's organizations here today. But I actually want to start with this question, which is it's something that Michael McIntosh and I got to present at National Sheriff's Association earlier last month. We really targeted in on this reality where almost all agencies, either by state statute, by policy, or by law, have a duty to intervene policy. And if not, almost everybody that I've worked with in public safety and criminal justice has an ethical or moral obligation to intervene, right? Duty to intervene. But I want to ask a brutally honest question. What does this look like in practice, right? What are we essentially asking people to intervene in cultures that are telling people not to intervene or that they'll be in trouble if they do? So the question that I have for any of my panelists is, we have a duty to intervene on paper, but if you don't have active bystandership culture, what does this look like in real life? I see some great thinking faces, and anybody is welcome to pop off on mute and get it started.
Well, I can jump in if you'd like me to. I think one of the most important things to remember. A lot of organizations that I've come across will do de-escalation training, and sometimes that gets confused with that training for actually intervening on one of your staff members that is moving in a direction that maybe they shouldn't be going. And I've not seen, other than through ABLE or through Heroes, any structured training material that has come out on that duty to intervene. Now, I have not been in the academy setting for a while, so I'm not real sure what they're doing in there. I would imagine that in our academies, there's probably a post requirement to at least teach the law that there's a duty to intervene. But again, I don't know of any other structured training that's going on right now that specifically addresses how we do that. And really, as we've discussed before, the most important part of all of that is what prevents us from doing that? What are those what we call inhibitors that are getting in the way from us intervening? And there's a lot of them. And when you start to talk to law enforcement officers across the country, they'll start to discuss those inhibitors that keep them from intervening. And that's why I'm so passionate about Heroes and Able is because it gives us that opportunity to address those, to have a conversation about why that happens, but then how we overcome that.
Thank you so much, Michael. Yeah, I appreciate that. And Greg, it looks like you're ready to chime in and would love to hear your thoughts building off of that. We have this duty to intervene on paper. What does it look like in real life when you don't have active bystandership training and culture?
Yeah, I think Mike is spot on how we have de-escalation. So now we're talking about the event is already occurring, and we talk about harmful events. And I think that the active bystander training takes into account, let's get ahead of it. What do we do and how do we get ahead of the event even occurring? And that's where we come into, I think, where it really starts to address wellness issues within your agency and with your people. What are we doing to pay attention to our people, to understand some of the dynamics they're going through, and maybe being able to step up and address them before the event happens, and which requires that de-escalation. And as Mike said, I don't think there is any other programs out there teaching our personnel, and it can be sworn personnel as in law enforcement, police, it could be in corrections. It really doesn't matter. But what are we doing to get ahead of it before events start unfolding? And I think that's the critical part of this is that we've talked about this. This is a risk management philosophy you're taking going into this with all of your personnel. It's just good for everybody. And again, I don't think it's being taught. I know I did, and I've sat back when I first went through these classes thinking, I've seen these events unfold. Why didn't our people do that? And it comes down to they just don't know how to. And that's what the beauty of both Heroes and Able brings to the table.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. It's interesting just to parallel there. And Robert, I'd love to hear if you have any other thoughts. But Robert, one of the question I'd love you to think about, and then I'm going to do a quick bridge here, is, in jail settings, what are those reasons that people don't intervene when they see harm? Like what are some unique inherent realities there that people can relate to? And the bridge I want to provide, Greg Guyton just talked about ABLE, which is Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement. If you don't know who they are, I'll put a link into the chat here in a second so you can check them out. And they really pioneered building off of some successful efforts in New Orleans PD with EPIC, bringing active bystandership to law enforcement. ABLE made the decision to stay really focused on patrol-based law enforcement. And what I really appreciate is their awareness and vision that does not cover the entire broad spectrum of public safety and criminal justice. And so thus Heroes focuses in on detention, dispatch, EMS, fire, civilian, kind of those broader public safety buckets. But what's very cool and unique that we've been doing is that we've also partnered with ABLE so that we're bringing a total solution to sheriffs. So we are able to train people both in an ABLE curriculum for patrol side and Heroes curriculum. We're going to talk a little bit later about how that's not a double curriculum. We know that would be a huge barrier to sheriff's offices. But yeah, Robert, I'd love to hear if you have any other thoughts on that question, but also anything specific that like what makes it hard to intervene in a jail setting?
Absolutely. Thank you, Abigail. I think Mike and Greg certainly summed up the overall big picture very nicely. And so I'm going to kind of drill down a little bit from my personal experience, and I retired as a captain of a jail just a year ago. But one of the issues that I found was that number one, we're generally working with very young officers or deputies. They're fresh out of the academy, and they're looking towards the senior officers who are really telling them like you know, you don't be a snitch, you don't do the intervening stuff. And so we're really facing this culture change, not only with the mental health aspects, but with really paying attention and really truly having each other's backs. And so that's where I think both the able and the heroes really come into play on really changing that framing and that mindset. Because really, and I did spend some time in internal affairs. Uh, Most of the cases that I investigated were completely preventable. There were poor decisions being made by officers. And if their partner had been a good partner and been an active bystander, it all would have been prevented. That officer wouldn't have gone through the internal affairs process. They wouldn't have had that stress. They wouldn't have had that mark on their history and in their personnel file. Completely preventable. And it's getting that mindset shift to it's okay to step in and pull your partner aside and yeah, how can we do this better? And really, I think that's very necessary in today's world. And then when we step up to, really the agency operational level, that's going to have an impact on drawing down the litigation that we see and the headaches that leaders are seeing, sheriffs and undersheriffs in particular. Uh, it's going to make their lives easier so they can actually focus on running the organization appropriately rather than being bogged down with these issues.
Yeah. You had shared a lot of that. I want to make sure people really highlight. First of all, everywhere we go and we train about this, we hear a lot about multi-generational workforce, and about the dynamic that is created in a paramilitary organization. And something you highlighted, right? Like people are coming out of this academy with this um, blind loyalty of needing to have each other's backs. And there is a strength in that. And like all strengths, when it's overplayed, it becomes your greatest weakness. And that's what we really see about that. And I love that Heroes gives us a new way to have each other's backs, which I think is so key there. But Robert, I actually reference you all the time when I'm training, and I tell people like what some of our national instructors used to work in IA, and they can speak firsthand of, the question, right, that we started with is duty to intervene is often on paper and on policy, but, why is it that we also need active bystandership, right? Like, why is it not happening elsewhere? And I think you're coming with that IA experience of, well, let's be, to Greg Guyton's point, let's be proactive, right? You're seeing all these preventable harms. So yeah, I really appreciate that. Greg Hanna Jr., I see you joined us. And you also did a tour in IA, and so just curious from your thoughts. We're talking about how duty to intervene is often on paper, but why, if why do we also need active bystandership? I mean, why is it not happening?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Abigail and team. Appreciate it and glad to be here. Yeah, as we teach in the Heroes curriculum, there are a lot of barriers to that and a lot of layers, and a lot of that stems from the internal culture that exists within the agencies. And it's often not spoken about outwardly. It's usually something that's kind of just spoken about in small roll calls or locker room or parking lot talk, offline, off duty. But we know that type of culture exists. And oftentimes there's this fear of being put in some type of silo within the culture of law enforcement profession and corrections. I don't want to be the snitch. I don't want to be that person that cannot be relied on or be that person that's not trusted. And so we know inherently across the country that policy is written, there's laws and statutes in place for duty to intervene and being a good bystander. But we don't often teach it in how to navigate those real cultural challenges that exist within the agencies, in the public service profession. And so one of the great things that I love about our Heroes curriculum is that we help professionals, public safety professionals, to navigate those challenges and to overcome those challenges and to feel more comfortable about it and not be in a space of, hey, this is a, well, what do we normally hear in classes? This is a snitch program, right? Because it's not that. It's really a peer-to-peer connection between you and your colleague, no matter what level you're on, and having a level of accountability. And oftentimes when we talk about this, when we talk about being a good intervener and navigating these challenges, we delineate that contrast between constructive loyalty and blind loyalty. And I know when I came into the law enforcement profession back in the 90s, it was very heavy to blind loyalty. Didn't matter. Constructive loyalty, that wasn't even really a thing or a language. And so, like anything, things shift and dynamics happen and things change. And so so that's one of the great things that I love about this is being able to talk about the real things that we don't talk about out loud, and then also help people to navigate how to become, active bystanders. And to your point, moving it from paper to action.
That's the key, right? Taking it from a demand to a culture for sure. And I want to build off of that. Well, I can't help myself but comment. I just came off. We were training last week in Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas, which was fantastic. And one of the things, Greg, Hannah, somebody talked about like, oh, well, when I came up through in the 90s, we were hardcore blind loyalty like that. We were pretty much indoctrinated in that. And this 20-year-old, brand new, less than a year in the job, really courageous, speaks up halfway through the training and said, I might have actually appreciated that better than how you do it now. And there was this silence in the room. And what he said is, y'all are still doing that to us. It's just you don't say it anymore. So you're quietly, without words, telling me that I am supposed to do it this way, but it's not as overt. And one of the things that we know from social psychology is that people learn more from their culture and social cues than from anything written. Right? You can give people a policy all day long, but they actually learn from the culture. So if the culture says one thing, even though on policy we have this duty to intervene, people are going to wonder why we have a mismatch. And so with that, because I mentioned a little social psychology, we're going to do a quick round of introductions for all of us and our panelists. And for those of you who are new to Heroes, we have a pretty standard introduction. We do a quick who we are and kind of what we're about, but we also talk about our why. So briefly, again, I'm Abigail Tucker. I'm a co-founder of Heroes. I'm an very proud ABLE national instructor as well. And I am a psychologist by training. And my why is very simple. I want to be part of anything that helps the health and wellness of public safety, working in public safety and criminal justice. And while I realize that in my lifetime, I might still be attending funerals, I would really like to stop attending funerals where people say, I wish I would have said something. So active bystandership for me feels like a true why in that. I'm going to actually just go in order of how we kicked off these questions. So I'll go Michael, Guyton, Robert, and then Hannah. So Michael, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Michael McIntosh. I'm a retired sheriff out of Colorado, and I'm still currently in the business. I'm a division chief for a Metro County Sheriff's Office in the south part of Denver, and I've been in the business about 39 years now. So just the questions that and responses that we've already talked about. So many things are just coming to my mind, especially when we go back and talk about blind loyalty and where we came from and where we are. And really, one of the key terms that you mentioned, Abigail, was culture. And to me, that's the most important part in all of this, is to change that culture so that when we have policies, when we have procedures, when we have laws, that it isn't just what we say we do, but we're doing what we say we do. And that's the huge disconnect to the point that you just made, right? Yeah, it's great that we have that on paper that says that this is who we are, but that's not what is evident in who we are. And anything that I can do to help leadership within our law enforcement organizations build cultures that are supportive of their people and supportive of their communities, and protecting both. We're real good about protecting our community. We've got to get a lot better about protecting our people, and I think that this is just one of those one of those pieces that has been missing for a long, long time in law enforcement, and really happy to be a part of it.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. We're so grateful to have you a part of our Heroes community. Greg.
Thank you, Abigail. Again, Greg Guyton. I've got 34 and a half years with the Ocean City, Maryland Police Department. I retired there in 2018 as a captain. I too had a very strong background in internal affairs. And as was mentioned before by Robert, it was like, majority of the investigations that you saw could have been prevented if you're just wouldn't been able to get ahead of it if colleagues had stepped up. And that was part of the reason I got involved with first the ABLE program and then on to Heroes. And then looking at how Heroes has really taken off in the correctional setting, which I had no experience with, and realized that there are so many similarities, but there are differences as well along with that. But I think that when you ask about the why, is I think that when was getting out of law enforcement or near the end of it, that it seemed like officer wellness or personnel wellness was kind of more of a buzzword, but there was nothing ever really being done about it. And when you look at these programs that have been put in place, these are truly programs that can address wellness issues. And we talk about mistakes and misconduct that go along with it. But if we address those wellness issues, everything else kind of falls in line, meaning you do reduce the mistakes and you can prevent misconduct if we just address the wellness. So my why is to bring about some of the experiences I had. And it's not the war stories, but you can really bring to light the experiences of in internal affairs and some of the conduct that you saw, and you realize, wow, a lot of this, just as Robert brought up, could have been avoided. And that's why I just want to bring those experience forward to hopefully help people to change that culture and get everybody on board top to bottom, which is also very, very important, that this is not just for your line officers. This is for everybody from the chief, the CEO, whatever you want to call that person that's in charge. They are very much involved in this as the first person that walks through the door. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. You can tell folks that we have panelists who are extremely passionate about this work, and it's because they've seen it firsthand, both in their careers, but all as national instructors as well. And I was thrilled for when Robert said that he could find time for Heroes in his second career time post working as a jail commander. So Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Abigail. So I'm Robert Nanny. I recently retired as a captain of the Adams County Detention Facility, and I worked for the Adams County Sheriff's Office for about 23 years. And really, my passion for Heroes really comes from the fact that uh, I want to see officers and deputies have a successful career and see retirement. And there's a lot of trials that go over those years, right? I mean, there's the things that we see, the things that we have to deal with, and those mental health issues that soon follow some of those actions that are or incidents that we're involved in. Um, and really, it's how can I look out for my partners that are following in my footsteps and make sure that they have that successful career and that they have the enjoyment and gratitude and fulfillment that I had.
That's wonderful. I love to hear that. Yeah. Greg, I don't know. I know you've been having maybe some connection issues. So if you can't introduce yourself, I totally understand. But I do think of something that Greg Hanna says all the time, which he likes to refer to Heroes and Able as the PPP program, which is Pension Protection Program, right? How do you get people healthy all the way at the end of their careers? Greg Hanna, are you able to introduce yourself? If not, I totally understand. Yay. Oh, you're muted, my friend.
Okay, here we go. All righty. Sorry, one, but again, Greg Hanna Jr. I am one of the national trainers here with Heroes. My background is in law enforcement. I spent 27 years as a captain with the Metro DC Transit Police in Washington, D.C. Served in a lot of capacities, and like Rob and like Greg G, spent time in a lot of time in internal affairs, um, but also served in a couple other command roles as well. And one of the things that um, used to always be on my mind as I went through some of the internal investigations is thinking about how a lot of these issues that come up in the profession could have been prevented if someone had just said something, if someone had just done something, if someone had just recognized that their colleague was in a space that they needed some form of help and they needed some form of identification that they were going through something. And so that's one of the drivers and one of the reasons why I gravitated so heavily to Heroes is because it is something about that peer-to-peer interaction that you have with your colleagues to really be accountable to each other and really to be able to identify when there is something wrong and prevent things. As we always say in the Heroes curriculum, the best prevention is the things that don't happen because you identify them before they become a problem, right? So you take care of those smaller things before they become bigger things. And then, of course, there's always opportunities as you go along. And so as I looked at a lot of the internal cases that I investigated, there was so many opportunities to prevent that thing from happening, whether it be someone career being derailed, someone actually losing their career. And so this is why I'm just so passionate about this and working with you all here at Heroes.
Thank you so much, Greg. And Greg has been with us both in expanding to corrections, as well as we've also expanded Heroes work into other areas of public safety like fire and EMS. And I love when he introduced himself because even though he is, as you heard, a retired law enforcement officer, his father worked in corrections and his mother worked in EMS. So he really brings that full circle public safety, which we know is also really common in sheriff's offices. And one of the things that I'm really passionate about, as a psychologist, I cut my teeth working in community mental health, and that included in jails and detox centers and crisis and all those fun places. I'm really passionate that geographically speaking, while I want to help support all law enforcement, sheriff's organizations are unique. And Michael, I'm wondering if I can really pitch a question over to you on this because some of our listeners may know this already, but some may not. And I think there's a hard truth to talk about there anyway, which is, people can come in and for a sheriff's organization, right? They could just come in and if they want to just quote unquote train their patrol, but that is a really narrow view of sheriff's organizations. And you often talk about this kind of whole, more holistic sense of sheriff's organizations. And so I'd love you to kind of unpack what that can look like from your experience. And I know you present and are engaged nationally with sheriff's organizations. But then my other question to that is, what's the risk in only training one side of a sheriff's office and not training the whole agency?
Yeah, I think one of the magical things that happens with Heroes and what is, maybe the secret sauce is the fact that it is holistic, which becomes really important, especially when we go back to that word culture. If you want to create a culture, and I think about those times in those leadership positions where we're wanting to affect change and we're wanting to ensure that that culture is permeating the entire organization. And that's very, very difficult if you don't have both ends working towards the middle. And what I mean by that is you don't have executive leadership and your line level staff all working in the same direction when it comes to changing that culture and being a culture of active bystandership, then you're going to miss pockets. And when you think about this, we were talking about earlier internal affairs, and you're going through an internal affairs investigation, and you're thinking to yourself, why did nobody do something? I mean, everybody knows that something should have been done. And how many times have we sat in those chairs and asked the question why, but never really drilled down to the overarching fact that we didn't teach them how to do that. And with Heroes, the holistic approach, whether they're civilian staff, whether they're working in dispatch, whether they're a patrol deputy, a detention deputy, there's interaction with everybody in the agency. I think of patrol deputies that are responding and taking someone to the jail. And maybe that's been a difficult ride because that person that they have in custody has been chirping the whole time. And that patrol deputy may need a break when they get there. If that detention deputy is astute and understanding what's going on, they can walk right in and say, "Hey, I got this for you. You know, you can go over there, write your report, get the paperwork done that you need to get done, and I'll take this person off your hand." That's how we work with each other. If we don't have this holistic approach, that detention deputy may not even feel comfortable intervening in that situation because it's a patrol deputy that's bringing this person in, and we don't know what's been going on there. So, and I've seen that happen many times with combatants that are coming into the facility, and it's one small example of we can avoid a lot of harm if we make sure that everybody is on the same page. And we also talked about, you know, command making policies, making procedures, thinking that it's being carried out, thinking that they've done their part, but it's not. It's not what's actually happening in the field or on the jail floor, and that's why it needs to be that whole. The command has got to be as involved in this from a leadership perspective as those that are out doing the job. And that's, to me, that's what makes sheriff's offices unique, because sometimes there is big separation. There's inherent silos that are built in just because there is a jail division, there is an investigations division, there is a patrol division, there is dispatch, there's the Office of Emergency Management. And there's times that we're all working together, but a lot of times decisions and the things that we're doing are separate. And that leadership, that executive leadership, that boss needs to set the expectations and the culture within the organization. So it really does need to have that holistic approach. And that's what I love about Heroes is it teaches us how to do that and how to do that well.
Yeah, I want to ping over to Robert here in a second to ask a very jail specific question. But Michael, can I ask you one more? You have a great phrase that you often say that is specific to sort of what will get you elected as a sheriff, but what you really should be paying attention to.
You're gonna have to remind
Oh,
me.
sorry. I was thinking about you often have a phrase that kind of reminds people that, what might get you elected as a sheriff is how the community perceives you, but the real risk and kind of your long-term Achilles heel is typically not going to be the same people or factors of what got you elected.
Yeah. And that you're gonna kick this over to Robert, but that jail, and that is a huge liability, probably the hugest liability in a sheriff's responsibility. But your people are the ones that, no matter where they work, they're the ones that are going to either make you or break you.
Thank you. Well stated. And so, Robert, I want to ask you a question. The earlier slide showed the pilot that we did here in Colorado, where we brought law enforcement patrol base as well as detention based and the rest of the house in Colorado. Really exciting. But one of the things that we hit home hard in that co-training here in Colorado with Sheriff's Org is that each agency had to send at least one representation from the jail. So they could not just send to patrol, they couldn't send dispatch and patrol, they couldn't send civilians, and many people did send civilians and patrol and dispatch, but every agency had to send somebody from the jail. And that allowed us to have some really good conversations in the room with people about that culture. And what I heard, and I think just from my, experience working in jails, is that it's sort of this open secret in many sheriff's organizations that the jail division is sort of undesired, untrained, unappreciated, and yet your biggest financial and risk management liability. So I'm curious from your perspective, how does this internal hierarchy breed, you know, risk factors for where we see harm occurring and we don't welcome an active bystandership culture?
Right. I've got a couple thoughts going on. So I'm going to start with the, kind of the high level is that, um, and it goes back to, some previous conversation about, training and attention is paid more to patrol divisions or investigative divisions than the jail division. And that inherently creates a big gap in a missed training opportunity because in the jail, like I mentioned right off the bat, is that we've got the young new officers generally that are coming in that are young, impressionable, and moldable, and we've missed the mark on bringing this kind of training in to get them started off on the right foot with building that proper culture of looking out for each other and paying attention to that mental health and really setting them up for career success. And so, you know, the I remember back to when Able first came out, and we trained our patrol division on Able, but our jail division was kind of an afterthought, and it really should have been reversed, right? We should have been doing Heroes, although it wasn't quite developed yet, but that's you got to start with the incoming first, rather than trying to work it backwards, because you're swimming upstream when you're trying to, teach the senior officers new tricks and new culture. Um, you're gonna find much more success in starting with the new and letting it trickle on downstream from there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It kind of really parallels something we talk a lot about, top down, bottom up, outside in and inside out. And you're really saying that that also includes training, policy, culture. Like, how are you modeling that no matter what you're bringing forward, that this has to include everybody? I really appreciate that. And I don't know about you, Robert, but I think the amount of people that have told us in trainings, I wish I had this when I started. I'm thinking about some of those agencies. We've delivered this to just state correctional agencies, youth correctional agencies. And certainly Robert and Michael and I have worked with agencies, sheriff's organizations that are only detention. So those exist. And I know California has a lot of those, a couple other states where sheriff's offices are predominantly detention. And particularly in those communities, we hear a lot of the older generation sharing, I wish I had this back in the day. And you really hear them trying to tell, to your point, Robert, the next generation, like, don't be a slave to this, right? You can shift the mindset, and we're learning too, which I think is so helpful. And I want to pivot, Greg Guyton, to you. We touched earlier about this blind loyalty, constructive loyalty. And I know that we're going to have some people who are here today and listening in on demand who maybe aren't actually in law enforcement, right? Maybe they are in higher education, maybe they are in risk management, HR, training. And I'm wondering if you can just share from your perspective a little bit more on that. I think most people understand that in public safety, peer to peer, you rely on each other for physical safety. People might not know you rely on your peers for a lot of that promotional leverage, right? Your peers and other can help you get hired, and emotional support, right? There's a lot of like, this culture has me and has my back. But how do those things warp into that blind loyalty, and what have you found helpful in trying to have individuals change that mindset?
Well, it comes down to in looking at some of the internal investigations that I did, and some of them go right to the heart of case studies that are brought about in both the programs, the active bystandership programs. And you go back and you look at why people did or didn't do something to prevent an act to happen. And it really comes down to they were unsure. They had all of these inhibitors, which we've talked about. it could be gender related, it could be rank related, it could be simply just a seniority uh, issue that's at hand here. And I think what you have to do is when you talk to these during even the investigations, without even having formal training on being an active bystander, it came down to the right and wrong and looking out for their fellow uh, officer, their colleague, for the best interest of everybody in the agency, because you have to kind of, because of this event, these are the things that now have transpired. We have this lengthy investigation that has now happened. We now have an event that if you had just stepped in and redirected this person, that this person would not now be subjected to disciplinary process, possibly termination, the emotional stress they're going to go through. And then you take into account, what about the emotional stress of your officers or your employees, their family? They're all affected by the acts that happen. So you have to bring it to the level of look at it from a very broad view. What's the impact of actions, inappropriate actions, and what does the impact have on them as an individual, their colleagues, on the agency, on the reputation of them, on the reputation of the agency as a whole. And you have to instill in them there's an accountability. We're all accountable to ourselves, but we're also accountable to who we're working for and our colleagues. And you have to bring that, I think, to the front, to the front of the conversation and have them thinking about that moving forward. But it comes down to the training. There's all these inhibitors. I mean, you could put a list up that would be 3 slides long of what really keep people from stepping in and doing things. And it's how do you get them over that feeling so that they feel comfortable no matter what the circumstances are, that they can step in and say, hey, look, I've got you. What you're about to do, you got to refocus this. I'm doing this because I've got your best interest in mind here. You just got to refocus the direction you're going, and for them to understand it's not trying to rat anybody about. It's not, as Greg Hanna was talking about, it's not about being the snitch squad. It's about doing the right thing for the right reasons, for the betterment of everybody and for the agency as a whole. And it's a very tough conversation to have with people. But you have to have the conversation up front. And we talk about, who are the best people to really instill these concepts in our colleagues. And it's, first line supervision has a huge impact on getting messages out there and getting people to understand what the right thing is to do, and having these open dialogues and group setting in your work groups about that, hey, it's okay for you. If you see me doing something, it's okay for you to come up and approach me. I'm not going to be offended by it. Please say something to me. And in turn, I'm going to do the same thing for you and understand I'm doing it because it's in everybody's best interest. But it's not easy. It's easy to sit here and talk about all of this, but to put it into play, it takes a little bit of practice, and it takes conversation. And so everyone's kind of on the same page.
Really appreciate that. I'll summarize, some of the highlights. There's a lot to really hold on to there. One quick highlight is that when you said frontline supervisors, every panelist had nod, 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 nod. So we all have seen this firsthand. It is actually, it's a key to unlocking, right, cultural shift. But I loved what you're talking about there, Greg. You're talking about recalibrating intentions. I want you to go home safely. I want this to go well. I want to have your back. That's a recalibration of intention. I also heard a reframing of the direction. Let's move to stop or prevent this potential harm. That's fantastic. And I think the unspoken there is a reset of what we expect from our training. Training should never be a check the box. What a waste of time. We don't have the time, money, or resources for our public safety individuals to be in check the box training. They need to be in meaningful training that is connected to our intended outcomes, having each other's backs and protecting the community that we serve. But we know that that takes leadership. Leadership has to buy in, leadership has to agree to that. And so, Greg, I'm wondering, Greg Hanna, if I can ping it over to you here. When we really started talking about the successes, the challenges that we did in these pilots and the successes, we saw the flip of the same coin. A lot of the challenges that we saw was because we didn't have leadership 100% on board. And a lot of the successes that we saw is because leadership from the beginning, Greg Guyton said that, from the beginning, they were on board. And so, Greg, Hannah, you've seen this in law enforcement, in corrections, in our hybrid models. Can you speak to a little bit about the need for leaders to step in on this?
Yeah, so fantastic question. I love diving into this one, and as my colleagues know, I love to tackle the tough and challenging ones. To Greg Guyton's point, right? This just can't be this checkbox thing. This has to be a holistic approach, and so it's vitally important that when an agency, whether you're a sheriff, whether you're a correctional administrator, whether you are a police chief, superintendent, no matter what you are in public safety, it is vitally important that you model what you are accepting and what you're adopting for your agency. The one thing that you cannot do with this type of program, but just any type of bystandership focus, is to weaponize it against your employees. And oftentimes, I have found, and that we've heard even in some of the sessions, is that is the fear, that is an inhibitor that a lot of members of an agency have is, hey, if we go through this and I do this, is this going to be weaponized against me? And what is the accountability should I have for my leaders? And so the leader should be really modeling this. And I give a fantastic example. I think my colleagues, I think you all are going to know exactly what I'm talking about with a major correctional institution, and just how the power of one individual can really change the complexity and stepping into a leadership role, even at that smaller, lower level. We had a student in one of our classes who was so moved by the framework, the concept, the discussion, moving past some of the cultural differences and the barriers that existed. He promised to us, he says, hey, he left the session and said, hey, I am going to go back and I am going to see if I can get my leadership to be here. And just kind of a little backstory to that is that prior to that, what we were hearing in our sessions was, hey, Abigail, Greg, Rob, Mike, this is great. This is fantastic. But where is my superintendent? Where is my sheriff? Where is my leader? Is my leader going to go through this? Are they going to support me in this? Are they a part of this movement, or are they just checking a box and making it some training that I am required to do and then hold me accountable to this? Where is their level of accountability? And that is a real thing that happens in the public safety space. And so what this individual did was he went back to his institution, and before we knew it, we had wardens there, we had deputy wardens, we had chief of staffs, and it didn't just start with just that one institution. It spread throughout the entire state among all the other institution, the leaders, to step up and say, you know what, hey, I think this is important. We have adopted this. I think this is important. At my facility, my institution, I want to be a change agent as well. I want to be able to model it. And in some cases, we even had a few leaders of institutions wanting to become a heroes instructor, not so much to teach it, but just to really understand and buy into the culture. And so, again, to that point, it just can't just be a checkbox. Just has to be really a holistic approach, and the leaders really set the tone and the culture. One of the things that I give an example for in a class, being in the command staff, is that I had no idea that when I go to a scene of a situation, I'm there to be a resource and to help, really, and just to be that buffer for the folks that are actually doing the work and just really trying to make sure that they have all the tools that they need. But what I quickly realized is that everyone is looking for me to really set the tone and set the standard for that situation. And so if I step out of alignment, guess what? Everything else is going to be out of alignment. So if I do something nefarious or I do something negative, that is going to be a reflection on not just me, but the entire agency. If I don't buy in to what it is that I'm selling as a leader, then how can I expect those who work underneath of me, that work for the agency, to buy into the same thing? And so, to the point there, right there on the slide, it says leadership is responsible for the culture it creates. That is so very important. That has to be the norm. I give one other quick example and just go into ABLE for a minute because along with what I just mentioned about what happened in correctional institution, I'm just going to touch on something here in the law enforcement space that happened over in ABLE. The entire state of New Jersey adopted ABLE principles. That means 33,000 plus individuals, law enforcement professionals, would go through the ABLE training. And that included corrections because in the state of New Jersey, correctional officers are considered law enforcement professionals as well. They're certified as law enforcement. And so one of the things that happened there in that space is that the attorney general who did that mandate sat in one of the classes as a student for the entire 8 hours. Now, think about that, okay? The attorney general for the entire state of New Jersey sat in a full 8 hour block of instruction with his phone down, undisturbed, and stepped away at the breaks, came back on time, and fully engaged as a student. What a powerful, powerful message to send to every law enforcement professional in the state. So I challenge any sheriff, any correctional administrator, that if you really want to make this a change, be that model, be that change. If a attorney general for an entire state can set aside in his very busy schedule for 8 hours to be able to model this and to feel that it's that important, any sheriff, any administrator, any chief can do the same.
Took me a minute there. Thanks, Greg, so much. I appreciate that. We actually just saw that. You've shared that experience before, and I tell leaders that whenever we engage with them, and I am more and more seeing leaders, we come in session, welcome their crew, put their phone down, and they are active participants. I popped a quote into the chat. Seems like a great place for us to wrap up today, and the quote is, "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." And this is by the former Australian Army Chief Lieutenant David Morrison. And if you don't know anything about him, if you Google search him, several years ago, I think we're now going on about a decade, there was some unacceptable sexual assault happening within their military. And he posted a no mincing words YouTube post to public, but he sent it to his um, to all of his leaders and everybody in the army, basically saying exactly that. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And he really invited active bystandership in a different kind of way because harm can be prevented. And that is our real lesson learned here. Again, for those of you who are listening to us on demand, if after this you have questions, you want to learn more, feel free to go to heroesintervene.com. There is a contact us page. We would love to hear from you, and I'm happy to send your message directly to any of our panelists if you would just like to hear from any of them. You can check out their bios. You can also check us out on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. We would love to hear from you and hear any feedback. I want to thank all of our panelists again for sharing your expertise, but moreover, for sharing your passion and your time. With that, thanks everybody, and have a fantastic rest of your day.